Picture a dusty frontier town on the brink of disaster, its church bells drowned beneath the roar of a raging flood. A lone rider emerges at sunrise, an outlaw shunned by his neighbors for being half-Apache. He carries secrets in his saddlebags and torment in his heart, yet fate thrusts him into a heroic act that will shake every shaky board in this rough-hewn settlement. When he rescues the preacher's daughter from certain death, the townsfolk are torn between gratitude and fear. Their ultimatum is stark: let them marry or banish them both. That thunder in the skies. It's the sound of destiny galloping near. It was the summer of 1882 in the Arizona Territory when a half-Apache man named Kai Red Hawk guided his weary Mustang along the precipitous edges of the Rio Verde. The sun glared hot overhead, pressing down like an iron brand, while black clouds rolled in from the north, warning of a storm that promised no mercy. Kai had been on the run for weeks, wanted for a crime he didn't commit, at least not in the way the rumors said. At just 27 years old, he had the sinewy build of a survivalist and the fierce gaze of a man who had learned life's hardest lessons too early. Kai's mother was Apache, his father a wandering saddle tramp from the east, who had once tried to settle down with the tribe but proved unfit for that life. When Kai was only 10, he lost them both, his mother to illness, his father to a drunken bar brawl that spilled into the desert. By sheer luck or grit or both, he had become an itinerant ranch hand who rarely stayed more than a few months in one place. The only constant companion in his life was the swirl of prejudice he encountered in every watering hole ranch yard and trading post. Being half-Apache meant he belonged neither here nor there. He had been erroneously accused of horse thievery outside of Cottonwood. It began innocently enough, with an offer to break a few wild Mustangs for a rancher named Burton Stillwater, who turned out to be the sort of man that believed all Apaches were liars and brigands. One night, a prized stallion went missing, and Burton pinned the theft on Kai. Without waiting for a trial, the local authorities, led by an unscrupulous sheriff named James Corbin, hastily posted wanted notices across the territory. Wanted Kai Red Hawk for horse theft and assault. Kai had fled east, crossing wide arroyos and rocky plateaus under the cloak of night. He had done no assault, but rumors have a habit of growing fangs. It was near sundown when he finally spotted a settlement on the edges of the Rio Verde Valley New Covenant. It was a modest town with a clapboard church perched on a hill, a general store, a few saloons, and a cluster of squat buildings. But to Kai's eyes, the place did not look warm or inviting. The storms brewing overhead reflected the tension etched into every corner of this frontier outpost. He reached the outskirts just as lightning forked across the sky. He needed shelter and a place to rest. A stable boy behind the local livery sized him up, took the coins Kai offered in exchange for a stall and a small stack of hay, and said nothing more. Kai could tell from the boy's worried eyes that trouble was imminent. That trouble, however, wasn't exactly about Kai's wanted poster. It was about the ominous clouds swirling over the distant canyons. A traveling merchant from Globe City, who also sheltered his wagon in the stable, looked up at the roiling sky. "Better find yourself some high ground," the old man muttered. "That river's about to break its banks." Kai felt a pang of foreboding. He recognized the smell of the air, the dampness that pricked along his arms. A flood was near. He led his horse inside, found a quiet corner, and tried to settle for the night. But the night never settled. Thunder cracked. The wind howled. Within an hour, sheets of rain fell in droves, turning the packed earth streets into oily mud. Lanterns flickered in the windows of every building, and across the way the church bell tolled, summoning folks to gather in prayer for deliverance. Kai watched from the stable's open doorway, uncertain if he should remain hidden or step forward to see if help was needed. He had no illusions about how this devout settlement might treat a fugitive. Then he saw something that changed his destiny. A slender figure in a cloak, struggling to hold an umbrella, sloshing through the rising water in the alley behind the feed store. A wagon behind the feed store was half submerged, its horses frantically kicking an attempt to escape the harness. In that instant, without a second thought, Kai vaulted from the stable. The cloak, it turned out, belonged to Eliza Wilson, the 20-year-old daughter of Reverend Jeremiah Wilson, New Covenant's stalwart preacher. She was battling the swirling mud and rain with a determination that sparkled in her pale blue eyes. She had rushed out to see if anyone needed help near the feed store. A neighbor's child had mentioned hearing a horse whinny in panic. The reflection of lightning lit her terrified face as she tried to free the wagon's horses. Kai approached, careful not to startle her. "Let me help," he shouted over the roar of rain. She turned, saw him, hair plastered to his face, broad shoulders, drenched, a man who looked more Apache than white. For a moment, fear flickered in her eyes, but she was desperate enough to accept any assistance. She gestured to the harness that was tangled in the wheels. Together they wrestled with the broken wood and soggy ropes, ignoring the cold that seeped into their bones. Another flash of lightning revealed Kai's bronzed features, the high cheekbones that set him apart. Eliza paused, breathless, uncertain if she should trust him. But the horses were in danger, so she pressed on. It took them nearly 10 minutes, but they finally loosed the terrified animals, leading them to a safer enclosure behind a strong barn. As they finished, the floodwaters began to surge across the main street, carrying debris of barrels, crates, and broken timbers. One of the town's wooden bridges, spanning a small creek, collapsed under the weight of the torrent. More storms loomed overhead. "Thank you," Eliza whispered. She observed his features with careful curiosity, the quickness in his eyes, the faint scar along his jaw. "I've never seen you here before." "Just passing through," Kai replied, pulling at his wet sleeves. He glanced around, noticing the ominous swirl of water creeping closer. "We should get you somewhere safe." She nodded. The church is on higher ground. Side by side, they trudged through the muddy side streets. The night was chaos. Townspeople hurried in every direction, some sloshing through waist-high water to rescue livestock, others boarding up windows against the gale. High above the bell in the steeple of the humble church still rang a clarion call to gather and pray. That was when a piercing scream rent the air. Kai spun, searching for the source. He found it, a young boy flailing in the current near the collapsed footbridge. Without hesitation, Kai sprinted toward the raging water. Eliza stared after him, a hand flying to her mouth. Kai plunged waist-deep, gripping a rope tied around a post, and reached for the boy. For several heartbeats it looked as if the torrent might take them both. But with remarkable strength, Kai hauled the child onto the slippery bank. The boy coughed up water, trembling but alive. Behind them a small crowd of drenched citizens gathered, including the frantic mother who snatched her son into her arms. Eliza approached, the relief evident in her eyes. You saved him," she said, wonder in her voice. Before Kai could respond, a hush fell over the small throng. Their gazes shifted. The local deputy, a square-jawed man named Earl Taggart, stepped into the flickering lamplight. He recognized the Half-Apache's silhouette and frowned. "You," Taggart said, in a voice that carried above the rain. We got posters with your face on it. Kai stiffened the boy, still coughing in the mother's arms. The mother clutched her child, not sure what to say, her gratitude mingling with the law's presence. Eliza sensed the tension. Deputy, he just saved that little boy. Taggart didn't budge. He's also wanted for horse thieving and assault. Gotta come with me, boy. He half drew his revolver, aimed it in Kai's direction. Water gushed down the street in a brown torrent. Kai's Mustang was still in the livery. Even if he tried to run, the flooding made escape nearly impossible. He held the deputy's gaze, ready to accept his fate. Then the Reverend Jeremiah Wilson himself appeared, lantern in hand, hat streaming with rain, an imposing figure for a man in his 50s. He had learned from townsfolk that Eliza was last seen with a stranger, and paternal alarm brought him outside. At the sight of the deputy's drawn gun, the Reverend demanded answers. "This man's an outlaw," Taggart said, simply flicking his barrel toward Kai. "We can do the arrest inside once the storm passes." Eliza tried to interrupt again. "But Father, he saved that boy's life, and he helped me free those horses." Jeremiah looked at Kai, eyes flicking to the wanted poster the deputy held in a soggy hand. Then he noticed the swirling waters behind them, inching ever closer to the church steps. With a decisive wave, the Reverend barked, "Enough! This storm is bigger than all our troubles. Let's get inside, pray for safety, and sort out any alleged crimes once we're not at risk of drowning." They all rushed into the church. The night had only just begun, and none of them could have foreseen how drastically fate would shift by dawn. Inside the church pews were full of frightened townspeople, shoulders hunched against the thunderclaps, eyes wide with worry. Candles and lanterns threw dancing shadows across the worn floorboards. As the preacher's daughter Eliza was well known, but she drew stares for the man at her side. Jeremiah Wilson marched toward the pulpit, water dripping from his coat. Everyone he called raising his arms to quiet the anxious murmurs. "We are in the midst of a biblical storm. The river is rising, and we may face the worst flood in decades. Have faith. Remain calm." Deputy Taggart motioned for Kai to move to a corner. The Half-Apache obeyed, though he was thoroughly drenched and bone-weary. Eliza lingered near him, ignoring her father's scowl of disapproval. Outside, thunder bellowed, and each crack of lightning illuminated the windows with ghostly radiance. The water outside the front doors had risen to the top step. Folks prayed fervently, mothers holding their children close, ranchers gripping their hats in trembling hands. Reverend Wilson read verses from the Bible about floods and redemption. He asked for God's mercy. Meanwhile, Taggart was whispering to the preacher, brandishing the soggy wanted poster for emphasis. Jeremiah nodded grimly. Then at last he addressed the congregation again. "Friends," the Reverend said gravely, "we have in our midst a man suspected of crimes. Normally, we would deliver him to the sheriff at once, but in these times of crisis, it is my belief that no man should be cast out. Tonight, he remains among us, but I must urge caution." A wave of uneasy relief washed through Kai. His immediate fear of arrest was stayed by the cataclysmic storm. He exhaled, leaning against the wall, exhausted. Next to him, Eliza offered a tiny, supportive smile, as if to say, "I believe in you." The evening dragged on. Rain pummeled the roof, threatening to cave it in. Deputy Taggart stationed himself near Kai, never letting him out of sight. Eliza drifted in and out, helping older women calm their crying grandchildren, distributing blankets. In the midst of the crowd, a mustached rancher named Hank Dobson recognized Kai's face from a black and white poster that circulated in Cottonwood. He began loudly complaining to Taggart. "We ought to tie him up right here. Don't let him slip out in the confusion." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the storm's fury abated slightly. Weary men slumped in the pews, drifting off to uneasy sleep. Children whimpered from nightmares of drowning. The last time Kai glanced at Eliza, she was wrapped in a worn shawl, near her father's eyes, heavy-lidded. She still looked at Kai with that quiet spark of compassion. Kai slept, or rather seemed leaning against the cold wall. His dreams churned with images of swirling waters of the boy he saved, of Eliza's trembling hand. Thunder rolled in the distance, and the night wore on. Morning arrived in a sullen hush, the storm having migrated elsewhere, leaving behind a battered town. Through the church windows, the new day revealed a watery expanse. Streets turned to rivers of mud fences washed away, and the ground littered with debris. Many of the outlying homesteads were likely destroyed. The air smelled of wet earth and shattered hope. It took some time before people felt brave enough to venture outside. They found that the church, perched on a low hill, was among the few structures not completely flooded. Water had receded a bit from the steps, but the damage was extensive everywhere. The wooden sidewalk in front of the saloon was half torn away. The general store's walls had buckled, and the stables near the river were gone, flattened and carried away downstream. Men moved about, calling to one another to assess the damage. Women and children surveyed the wreckage. A few horses that survived huddled anxiously near scraps of fence. Cows had scattered into the desert or been swept away. Kai stood on the church's front steps, shackled by the watchful Deputy Taggart, though not yet physically bound with ropes. Eliza and the Reverend joined the solemn crowd as they stared out at the carnage. Then a collective gasp rose as someone pointed toward the rising sun. The Rio Verde had altered its course slightly in the flood, and now, swollen with debris, it cut a deeper channel close to the edge of the town. Another surge of water was coming down from the mountains, and it threatened what remained of the main street. A terrified hush fell as the muddy, violent current churned ominously. Suddenly, a cry went up from the far side of the bank. "Help! Is anyone out there?" A cluster of survivors stood marooned on a patch of high ground near a toppled telegraph pole. Among them was a family of 4, mother-father, and 2 small children, along with an older man who clung to a floating log blood matting his hair. They were maybe 70 yards across the swirling flood, calling desperately for help. If the water rose another foot, they would be swept away. The townspeople rushed to the edge of the new channel. They had one battered canoe, courtesy of an old trapper named Ulysses Braun. But the rope was partially torn, and no one dared pilot it across such treacherous waters. "That current's too strong," one man muttered, shaking his head. "We can't just let them drown," Eliza insisted, scanning the crowd, her gaze landing on her father, the deputy, and finally on Kai. Kai stepped forward. "I'll do it." Deputy Taggart grabbed his arm. "Not so fast. You're under suspicion." "I said I'll do it," Kai repeated, voice calm but firm. "I have experience with canoes from my mother's people." Taggart faltered, torn between protecting the town from a presumed outlaw and saving those helpless across the flood. Then the Reverend intervened. "Let him go." A few onlookers murmured uneasy agreement. A short, tense silence followed. Finally, Taggart swore under his breath and let go of Kai's arm. "All right, but I'm coming with you." Kai offered a curt nod. He grabbed the rope and tested the canoe's stability. Taggart climbed in behind him, revolver still strapped at his side, ready for anything. Together, they pushed off from the muddy bank. The crossing was harrowing. The current seized the small canoe, threatening to spin it around. Rain-swollen logs and broken beams floated dangerously close. Kai knelt at the bow, controlling each stroke of the paddle with practiced precision. Taggart, his jaw clenched, tried to follow Kai's instructions, though he knew little about balancing in fast-moving waters. Miraculously, they reached the stranded family. The man hoisted his children into the canoe, handing them to Taggart. The mother climbed in next, wailing prayers of thanks. That left the older man, with the head wound, who looked nearly unconscious. Kai hauled him aboard, carefully shifting weight so they wouldn't capsize. Now came the real challenge, making it back. The canoe weighed down with 5 passengers, rocked precariously. The townspeople on the far bank cried out encouragements. On the water's surface, debris swirled in wide arcs. Taggart shot a glance at Kai. The deputy's eyes were full of fear, but also newfound respect. They paddled in unison, each stroke a fight for control. Water splashed over the gunwales, lightening Kai's face with flickers of panic. A log rammed the side. The canoe lurched. The children shrieked. Kai shouted for Taggart to keep paddling. Another wave of debris turned them around until they were nearly sideways. With a heave of his shoulders, Kai plunged his paddle deep, correcting their course just enough to keep afloat. They were within 20 yards of the bank when the ropes tagged on a piece of submerged wood. The canoe jerked to a halt, water rushing in. Panic erupted. The wounded man moaned. The children sobbed. Taggart turned to Kai, eyes wild, hoping the Half-Apache had a plan. Kai twisted around, yanked the rope free with a grunt, and in that moment, the canoe shot forward, nearly tipping. Everyone shifted their weight as water poured over the rim. But by some divine grace, the canoe stabilized. The townsfolk, led by Eliza and Jeremiah, raced into the shallows to help them out of the boat. The rescued family stumbled onto the muddy shore, trembling, soaked, but alive. The older man was carried to the church for medical attention. Taggart and Kai collapsed on the bank, panting hearts pounding. Onlookers murmured in amazement. Some openly marveled at Kai's courage. Others stared in resentment, as if unsure how to reconcile their hatred for Apaches with the fact that Kai had just risked his life to save neighbors. At last, Taggart rose to his feet. He looked down at Kai, breathing hard. "You did good," he said, voice rough. "But we're still gonna need to talk about those charges." Kai met his stare, then nodded. "I know." In the crowd, a handful of men whispered among themselves. "That half-breed's a hero. Don't matter. He's wanted by the law. Surely we can't lock him up after what he's done." The Reverend stepped up, voice gentle but firm. "Let's all get inside. These people need rest. This entire town is in crisis. We'll hold a proper meeting once the waters fully recede. For now, no more talk of arrests." Deputy Taggart, sopping wet, had lost some of his swagger. He knew the folks might riot if he tried to lock Kai up immediately. So he nodded, though his eyes warned Kai to not stray far. That was how Kai Redhawk found himself a reluctant hero. But the real storm of hearts, prejudice, and choice was only just gathering strength. By late afternoon, the immediate danger had passed. The raging waters had swept south, leaving behind soggy chaos. Some townsfolk set about salvaging what was left of the stables, hoping to find missing livestock. Others tried to clear rubble. The church became a makeshift hospital for the wounded. Kai roamed the edges of the town offering help where he could. He aided an old blacksmith whose roof had collapsed. He dug through debris, searching for any sign of folks who might still be missing. Eliza, tending to the injured, caught glimpses of him outside as she moved from one crisis to another. Everywhere Kai went, eyes followed. Some glances were grateful, others suspicious. It was as if the townspeople were collectively unsure whether to label him hero or outlaw. Meanwhile, the Reverend and Taggart conferred quietly in the church office, discussing next steps. They had to figure out how to handle a man who was both a savior and a fugitive. They also had to contend with the raw devastation from the flood. A messenger was sent on horseback, one of the few horses left that could still manage the muddy roads, to request the presence of the sheriff from the next town over. Late in the day, exhaustion weighed on everyone like a heavy saddle. Reverend Wilson found Eliza kneeling beside a feverish child, sponging cool water on his brow. He placed a hand on her shoulder, mustering a fatherly smile. "My dear," he said softly, "you've done enough for now. Mrs. Harriet Cook can handle the rest. Take a moment for yourself. You look spent." Eliza wiped her damp brow and nodded, standing to follow her father. They stepped outside into the twilight hush, the skies still thick with clouds, but no longer threatening rain. The muddy streets were scattered with broken wooden planks, soaked cloth, overturned barrels. A sorrowful hush settled on the battered town. They walked in silence for a moment, father and daughter, each gathering thoughts. Finally, Jeremiah spoke. "I've seen the way you look at that man, the Half-Apache." "Kai, is it?" Eliza stiffened. "He's not who they say he is," she replied softly. "He saved my life, Father, and that of a little boy, and an entire family." The Reverend exhaled slowly. "I understand your gratitude. But the law claims he's a criminal. We must be cautious. Our faith teaches us redemption, yet it also teaches respect for law and order." Eliza's eyes were fierce in the fading light. What if the law's mistaken? Or prejudiced? Jeremiah gazed at her for a long time, then sighed. "We'll see what the sheriff says. For now, I cannot openly defy Deputy Taggart, nor can I stand by and watch them punish an innocent man." "Pray for wisdom, my child." Eliza nodded, though her heart bristled. She yearned to speak with Kai, ask him about his past, discover the truth. But the weight of her father's protective presence and the town's watchful eyes kept her at arm's length. That night, Kai found an unused cot behind the general store, which still stood precariously. He tried to sleep, but was roused by the sound of quiet footsteps. He turned to see Eliza approaching, a shawl draped around her slender shoulders. Moonlight, watery from leftover clouds, shone on her pale face. "Kai," she whispered, "are you all right?" He blinked in the semi-darkness, surprised that she had come to see him in private. "I'm fine," he said, rising to a seated position on the cot. "Just tired." "You?" She sat on a broken crate beside him. "I can't sleep. My mind's racing. All this destruction. And you. I want to know your story." He hesitated, feeling the old ache of having to explain himself. But something about her soft voice, her sincere curiosity melted his defenses. So he told her haltingly about his parents, his travels, how he ended up working for Burton Stillwater, only to be accused of horse theft when the prized stallion vanished. "I never stole that horse," Kai insisted. "Burton was always suspicious of me because of my heritage. It wasn't the first time I faced that. But he made sure the law pinned it on me. He looked at Eliza, eyes dark with pain. People like me, half Apache, half white, we don't belong anywhere. Eliza's voice trembled with empathy. You belong wherever you choose to belong. And I? She paused, cheeks heating in the faint moonlight. I'm sorry for how you've been treated. Kai shrugged. Not your fault. The hush between them crackled with unspoken emotions. Finally, she said, It's not fair that you're here risking imprisonment when you've saved so many lives. She reached for his hand. He let her take it. Thunder rumbled in the far distance. They sat like that for several minutes, hearts pounding, forging a silent bond in the midst of ruin. Eventually she withdrew her hand, rising. If there's anything I can do, please tell me. Kai managed a faint smile. Just don't abandon me like everyone else. Her eyes shone with resolve. I won't. Then she was gone, the hush of her footsteps swallowed by the night. Kai exhaled unsettled yearning, but also strangely comforted. He lay back down, gazing at the battered rafters overhead. For the first time in years, he felt something like hope. Morning came, and with it the arrival of Sheriff Clay Anders of the neighboring town of Two Pines. Word spread quickly that the sheriff, accompanied by 2 cavalrymen from Fort Apache, one of whom was Private Nathan Jacobs, had braved the washed-out roads to respond to the crisis in New Covenant. The battered townsfolk gathered near the church as Sheriff Anders, tall and imposing with a handlebar moustache, surveyed the damage. The Reverend led him through the muddy streets, pointing out the hazards and filling him in on how the Half-Apache had saved multiple lives. At last, Anders arrived at the ruined storehouse where Kai was helping rebuild a partial wall that had collapsed. Deputy Taggart stepped forward, saluted half-heartedly. Sheriff. That's him, Taggart said, pointing. Kai stood hammer in hand, sweat glistening on his brow, shirt sleeves rolled. He regarded Anders calmly. Anders pulled a folded wanted poster from his vest and compared it to Kai. Sheriff Anders fixed Kai with a calculating look. Kai Red Hawk, you're wanted in Cottonwood on suspicion of horse theft assault and evading arrest. According to this, you're facing a potential prison sentence. Kai laid down the hammer, unafraid. I never stole those horses. The sheriff's eyes flicked to the half-rebuilt structure, then to the muddy street where folks stared in tense silence. Rumor has it you saved a family and a little boy from drowning. Kai said nothing, unwilling to use his heroics as currency. It was the townspeople who spoke up. A rancher's wife recounted how she saw Kai plunge into the flood to save the child. Hank Dobson begrudgingly admitted that the Half-Apache had risked his life for folks who otherwise might have perished. Even Taggart gave a terse nod of acknowledgement. Sheriff Anders scratched his mustache. You realize I still have a duty to the law, right? If there's a valid warrant, I have to enforce it. Reverend Wilson stepped forward, clearing his throat. Sheriff, might I propose that in light of the extraordinary circumstances, we properly investigate the charges before hauling this man off to a jail cell. He's done more to help us this past day than any of us could have asked, and I for one am not convinced he's guilty of the crimes alleged. The sheriff exchanged glances with Private Nathan Jacobs, who stood quietly at Anders's side. Nathan Jacobs gave a small shrug, as if to say, Your call. Fine, Anders replied at last, his expression still stern. We're dealing with a big mess here, and I'll need time to gather statements. But Red Hawk, understand this. You are not free to roam off. If you try to bolt, my men will find you. For now, you remain under our watch. Kai nodded. I don't intend to run. So the precarious arrangement began. Kai continued helping the townspeople rebuild under the watchful eyes of either Deputy Taggart or one of Anders's men. Eliza was thrilled that Kai wasn't immediately arrested, though tension still simmered among the more prejudiced townsfolk who muttered about half-breeds and turning the other cheek too far. In the days that followed, the town worked tirelessly to restore some semblance of normalcy. The flood damage was severe, but with everyone pitching in, they managed to clear rubble, rebuild fences, and salvage store supplies. Reverend Wilson coordinated relief efforts, while the sheriff wrote letters to Cottonwood requesting sworn affidavits about the missing horse. Amid this labor, Kai and Eliza found themselves drawn to each other more and more. Whenever their duties intersected, bringing supplies to the makeshift infirmary or hauling debris from a collapsed barn they shared, quiet conversations passing each other, knowing looks. It wasn't lost on the townspeople. Whispers began to circulate. The preacher's daughters got eyes for that outlaw. Some were scandalized, others intrigued. Hank Dobson, who had lost half his herd in the flood, was especially vocal. "That girl's too pure to get mixed up with the likes of him." He spat one evening at the saloon, slamming his whiskey glass down for emphasis. Others, like Mrs. Harriet Cook, a matronly widow, saw things differently. "God works in mysterious ways," she told her neighbors. "And maybe he's using that young man for good." The rumor mill churned. Deputy Taggart, eavesdropping on these rumors, was torn. He respected Kai's bravery, but also clung to his sense of duty. He confronted Eliza one afternoon as she walked the muddy road from the store. "You need to be careful around that fella Taggart," warned eyes flickering with caution. "You're the preacher's daughter. Wouldn't want folks talking." Eliza bristled. "I'm not afraid of talk, nor am I afraid of Kai." Taggart pursed his lips. "Suit yourself. Just remember, if the law says we gotta take him in, that's how it's gonna be." Eliza stepped around him, refusing to engage. But her heart pounded with anger. She knew Kai was a good man. Somehow she was sure of it. A week passed. The waters had subsided enough that roads were beginning to open. Sheriff Anders received a reply from Cottonwood. The statement from Burton Stillwater was vehement. "Kai Redhawk is a proven horse thief and dangerous man." However, the local blacksmith in Cottonwood claimed otherwise in a separate note, "I never saw Kai Redhawk steal nothing." Burton is quick to blame Apaches for any misfortune. He had no real proof. Anders, priding himself on justice, weighed the conflicting accounts. He interviewed Kai thoroughly, noting his consistent version of events. Then Anders tried to confirm if there had been any actual assault. All they found was a rumor that the real assault was a scuffle between Kai and one of Burton's ranch hands, who apparently attacked Kai first. One evening, Anders and Taggart convened in the makeshift jail, which was just a corner of the old saloon that was still dry, to discuss the matter. Kai sat on a stool, arms crossed, while a single lantern illuminated the men's faces in the gloom. "I'm leaning toward dropping these charges," Anders said bluntly, looking Kai in the eye. "But official law requires that we travel to Cottonwood for a proper hearing, or else get an official release from their local judge. The question is, do we do it now or wait?" Taggart scratched his cheek. "Roads are still half washed out, might be risky travel. But we can't sit here forever. The folks in Cottonwood might get a posse up if they think we're ignoring the warrant." Anders sighed. "I'll give it a few more days. Meanwhile, Red Hawk, you keep your nose clean. Don't stir trouble." Kai nodded in relief, though he remained guarded. "I understand." In the shadows, Private Nathan Jacobs observed quietly. He had seen enough to suspect Kai was telling the truth. He resolved to do what he could to keep the peace. But peace was short-lived. As the town slowly pieced itself back together, resentment and distrust simmered among a faction of residents led by Hank Dobson. They disliked the Half-Apache's presence, and especially disliked the growing closeness between him and the preacher's daughter. One afternoon, while Eliza and Kai were assisting in rebuilding the front porch of a damaged home near the old stables, Hank Dobson and two cronies sidled up. Hank scowled at the sight of Eliza holding nails, while Kai hammered. Miss Eliza, Hank drawled, "Don't you think you should leave that job to us menfolk? Ain't right for you to be fraternizing with her." He paused, letting the slur hang unsaid, but his meaning was clear. Eliza glared. "With a hero who saved lives. That's who I'm with." Hank sneered, turned to Kai. "You think a little rescue in a flood makes up for your crimes? Far as I'm concerned, you're scum. My neighbor lost his horse to a thief who might be your kin." Kai kept his hammer steady, though anger coiled inside him. "I'd rather keep working than argue," he said, turning back to the nails. Hank lunged forward, knocking the hammer out of Kai's hand. The tool clattered to the plank. Tension crackled. Eliza stepped between them, outraged. "Stop it!" Hank shoved her aside, not hard, but enough that she lost her balance. Kai's eyes blazed. In a blink, he pinned Hank's arm back face taut with fury. Hank yelped. One of Hank's cronies reached for a revolver, but Eliza cried out, "No, someone get the deputy." A cluster of townsfolk gathered alarmed. Just then, Private Nathan Jacobs, who had been passing by, ran up. He quickly intervened, separating Kai and Hank. "Cool your heads," Jacobs barked, "or I'll lock you both up." Hank, red-faced, massaged his arm. "This ain't over," he spat. Then, jerking his head at his cronies, he stalked away. Eliza's eyes shone with tears. "I'm so sorry." Kai retrieved his hammer, exhaling. "Not your fault." But the seeds of violence had been sown. Tension thickened like a noose around the Half-Apache's neck. Later that evening, a crowd formed in the church, summoned by Reverend Wilson for a town meeting. Word had spread that some men were stirring trouble regarding Kai. The battered pews filled with anxious faces. Sheriff Anders and Deputy Taggart stood near the altar, arms folded. Kai sat in the back corner, silent, aware of the curious, suspicious eyes on him. Eliza stood beside her father, head held high. Reverend Wilson cleared his throat. "Neighbors, we have come through a terrible flood by the grace of God. Now we face another challenge, our unity and fairness as a community. Some of you have expressed concerns about Mr. Kai Redhawk." Hank Dobson rose abruptly. "Concern, you say? I call it outrage. That man's an outlaw, wanted by the law, and yet we coddle him like a stray dog. He's got the preacher's daughter under his spell." Gasps and mutters rippled through the congregation. Eliza looked at her father, face flushing. Hank pressed on. "I'm a God-fearing man, but this is too much. We can't let a half-breed outlaw dirty our reputation. We want him gone." Reverend Wilson raised a hand for silence. "Mr. Dobson, we do not speak like that in this house." But Hank had allies. A handful of men and women nodded. Others looked uncertain, glancing from Eliza to Kai. Eliza couldn't bear it. She stepped forward, speaking in a clear, steady voice that echoed in the hushed church. "Kai saved my life during the flood. He saved a little boy, he helped rescue a family, and he's done nothing but help since. The charges against him are being investigated. If you call yourselves good Christians, how can you demand he be cast out?" or worse. A stunned silence ensued. Then a wiry farmer named Clem Rawley stood. "Miss Eliza, we all respect you and your father. But some folks say you and that man have grown too close. The way you look at each other, it ain't proper." Eliza's cheeks flamed. "How is that any of your concern?" Hank jumped back in. "We can't have a scandal in this town. If they're together, we either force them to wed, or we tell him to leave once the roads are dry enough. That's how it's always been done to protect a woman's honor." Murmurs of agreement and disagreement rumbled. Reverend Wilson turned pale at the suggestion. Even the sheriff rubbed his temples, looking fed up. Deputy Taggart cleared his throat. "Now hold on. The law doesn't say we can force people to get married. That's not how it works," Hank sneered. "Out here, we got our own ways. The preacher's daughter can't be seen in a scandalous relationship with a half-breed outlaw. It's either official or it's done." Kai stood abruptly, fury in his stance, though he tried to remain calm. "I won't be forced into anything." Hank turned on him, jabbing a finger. "Then leave. We'll see that you do." Shouts erupted. Some folks demanded he leave. Others argued that he should stay until the law exonerated him. Amid the uproar, Eliza looked at her father with pleading eyes. The Reverend raised his voice above the din. "Enough, all of you." Silence fell, though tension pulsed in the air. Jeremiah gazed at Eliza, then at Kai. Heartbreak etched on his face. "None of this is how it should be," he said, voice trembling. "But I fear for my daughter's reputation and safety. This is a cruel predicament." Eliza flinched, tears threatening. "Father, you can't be serious about me marrying just because of gossip." He closed his eyes. "I love you, child, and I want what's best. The talk is fierce, the prejudice deep. I can't bear to see you shunned if we do nothing." A stony silence. Then, with a heavy sigh, the Reverend declared, "In 1 week's time, if the charges against Kai are not cleared, we will abide by the demands of the community. Either he departs New Covenant, or if it be your wish, and if he is proven free of guilt, he may stay and wed my daughter provided she consents. But I will not see her honor destroyed by these rumors. God forgive me." Eliza's face burned with shock. Kai looked ready to bolt from the church, but the memory of the raging flood and how he was needed here kept him rooted. Hank Dobson smirked, satisfied. A portion of the crowd seemed uncomfortable, but none spoke up to challenge the Reverend's compromise. The meeting ended in a storm of unsettled whispers. Eliza fled the church, tears staining her cheeks. Kai, after a moment of numb disbelief, followed her out into the moonlit streets. Eliza hurried across the muddy road, ignoring the stares of passers-by. She found an abandoned wagon behind the general store and sat on the edge, breath shaky. A few minutes later, Kai appeared, footsteps soft. "Eliza," he said, voice low. She looked up, eyes glistening. "This is madness. They're treating me like some possession to be bartered, and you like an animal to be caged or cast out." Kai approached cautiously, his expression torn. "I've seen it before, settlers who talk about right and wrong, but treat us Apaches like we're less than human. I don't blame your father, though. He's stuck between them and his conscience." Eliza swallowed hard. "I want to do right by my father, but I won't be forced to marry if my heart doesn't choose it." She paused, trembling. "Though, if I'm honest, my heart isn't opposed to you." Kai's breath caught. The swirling emotion in her eyes matched the ache in his own chest. It was so sudden, this closeness, yet it felt undeniably real. He reached out gently, brushing a tear from her cheek. I don't want you to suffer for my sake. Once I clear my name, I'll leave if that's what you want. I won't let them twist your life." She shook her head, voice trembling. "I don't know what I want, but I know I can't stand watching them treat you like this." Kai's heart pounded. The raw honesty in her gaze stirred something deep within him, something that transcended the lines of heritage and prejudice. He leaned closer, feeling the electricity of the moment. She startled slightly, but her eyes never left his. Then, as if pulled by an invisible cord, they closed, the distant lips meeting in a brief, tender kiss, a spark of solace in a world gone mad. When they broke apart, the hush of the night enveloped them. "I don't want to force this," Kai murmured. Eliza exhaled, cheeks flushed. "Neither do I. But let's see if the sheriff can clear you first. Then we decide." Kai nodded, stepping back. "I'll do everything I can." She touched his arm. "Take care of yourself, Kai." He smiled sadly, then melted into the shadows, leaving Eliza alone with the swirl of desire, confusion, and the weight of the entire town's expectations bearing down. Days passed with excruciating slowness. Sheriff Anders wrote more letters seeking evidence. The tension in New Covenant was palpable. Some folks carried on with their chores, while others fueled the gossip fire. Hank Dobson openly threatened vigilante action if Kai wasn't gone by week's end. On the 5th day, an exhausted rider from Cottonwood arrived, bearing statements from Burton Stillwater's ranch hands. In them, 2 men admitted they had seen Burton's nephew, Billy Stillwater, leading the stolen stallion away the night it disappeared. Burton had arranged to shift the blame to Kai, hoping to keep the nephew's name clean. Sheriff Anders read the statements with a grimace. He looked at Deputy Taggart and Private Jacobs. "That does it. Red Hawk is innocent." Taggart nodded relief in his eyes. "So that's official then." Anders beckoned Kai. Handing him the documents, Anders said, "I'll notify Cottonwood immediately. You're cleared of all charges. Burton's the liar, not you." A wave of vindication and disbelief swept over Kai. "Thank you, Sheriff." Anders offered a curt nod. "You earned it. Don't let me catch you in any real trouble, though." Kai managed a wry grin. "Understood." Word spread quickly. Kai was exonerated. Most townspeople, especially those who appreciated his bravery, welcomed the news. But Hank Dobson and his cronies seethed. They had pinned their dislike on the notion that Kai was a criminal. Now that notion was gone, and all that remained was prejudice. The next evening, the church bells tolled once more for a town gathering. People packed in, curious. Reverend Wilson stepped up to the front. Eliza, perched on a side pew, clutched her trembling hands in her lap. Kai stood near the aisle posture, stiff. In his measured voice, Jeremiah Wilson announced that the charges were dropped and the real thief identified. A ripple of applause and murmured satisfaction spread. Then the Reverend addressed the matter of his daughter and Kai Red Hawk. "My daughter Eliza and Mr. Red Hawk have done nothing wrong. Yet I sense the disquiet among many of you. Rumors and prejudice persist. I find it grievous that anyone would think to force their union or banish him." Some applause, some muttered discontent. Hank Dobson's face twisted in anger. The Reverend inhaled deeply. "As a father, I must honor my daughter's choice. Eliza, my child, if you would speak." A hush fell. Eliza stood, heart pounding, stepping into the aisle. Her eyes darted between her father and Kai. "I have grown to respect and admire Kai, for his courage, kindness, and honor. If in time we choose to build a life together, that will be our decision. Not the town's, not the rumor mill's, and certainly not some forced edict. The tension in the church was thick enough to cut. Eliza continued, voice steady. Let me be clear. I reject the ultimatum that we marry or that he leave. If he wants to remain here, he is welcome as far as my father and I are concerned. Should the rest of you disagree, we will go elsewhere. You will lose your preacher because I will not be parted from my father. Let your consciences guide you. A stunned silence followed. Then an eruption of voices. Some urged acceptance. Others cursed and threatened. Hank Dobson jumped up. You can't hold the preacher's office hostage. This is a Christian town. Reverend Wilson's voice thundered in the hush. I am a Christian man, and I will not abide hatred masquerading as righteousness. Any who disagree may speak to me privately. At that moment, Private Nathan Jacobs, typically silent, stood and raised his hand. I've seen the character of Kai Redhawk. He's no threat to you. If anyone says different, they can answer to the cavalry. Hank glared, but the tide was shifting. A majority of the townsfolk, worn by tragedy and moved by Kai's heroism, realized they wanted to move forward. The uproar slowly settled into a reluctant acceptance. The Reverend ended the meeting with a prayer for unity and healing. Hank Dobson stomped out. Many of those who had demanded the forced marriage left with their hats in hand, heads low, uncertain. In the following days, life in New Covenant settled into a more peaceful rhythm. Kai remained in town, if not with a specific plan to stay forever. At least to see how matters developed. Sheriff Anders and his men departed satisfied that the law was upheld. Deputy Taggart returned to his routine, though with less suspicion in his eyes for Kai. Eliza and Kai spent more and more time together, strolling the muddy streets, sharing quiet talks near the partially rebuilt stables. Each day they discovered new corners of each other's souls. Her longing for a life beyond the narrow confines of a preacher's daughter, his yearning for acceptance. The backlash from Hank Dobson's faction diminished as folks remembered how Kai risked his life during the flood. A few holdouts maintained their prejudice, but the threat of violence receded. Hank himself simmered in resentment, though in the face of the sheriff's final ruling and the Reverend's unwavering stance, he found little public support for further hostilities. One warm afternoon under a bright southwestern sun, Eliza and Kai rode out beyond the town's edge. The desert had begun its slow bloom after the torrential rains, tiny flowers poking through the sand. They halted atop a small rise, looking down at the Rio Verde, which still carried the scars of the flood. Eliza gazed at Kai. What do you see for your future? He took a moment, scanning the horizon. For so long, I never saw a future. Just day-to-day survival. But now, I see possibilities. She smiled gently. I know it's only been a short time, but everything we've been through, it feels like a lifetime. Would you want to make a home here? He met her eyes, a swirl of hope and trepidation inside him. If your father and the town can accept me, I'd like to try. But I never want you to feel forced. She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers with his. It's my choice. I can't promise an easy road. But I think I'd like you by my side. Kai's heart thudded. He bent forward and kissed her softly, the desert wind rustling the brush around them. Rumors spread that a wedding might be near on Kai and Eliza's terms. Some in town whispered it was pressure. Others saw it as love triumphing over prejudice. preparations for a modest ceremony began. Reverend Wilson, still conflicted, but unwilling to stand in his daughter's way, agreed to officiate if they chose to proceed. One crisp morning, Eliza met Kai and her father in the study. With gentle certainty, she said, "We are ready." A week later, in front of the freshly painted church, its walls still bearing the memory of floodwater, the townsfolk gathered. Eliza wore a simple cotton dress, Kai his best shirt, and Reverend Wilson spoke the vows with solemn grace. When they kissed, the crowd erupted, some with joy, others with restraint. Hank Dobson was notably absent, but most came to witness what felt like a turning point. Their union marked not just love, but the start of a quieter revolution in New Covenant. Months passed, and New Covenant began to heal physically and emotionally. The flood's scars still marked buildings and memories, but its most enduring legacy was the unlikely union it had forged between a half-Apache man once branded an outlaw and the preacher's daughter who dared to love him. Kai Redhawk found honest work, eventually purchasing a modest plot of land at the edge of town. With the help of Private Nathan Jacobs, who vouched for him at Fort Apache, Kai started supplying horses to the cavalry, an ironic twist given his past accusation of horse theft. Eliza embraced her new role as both preacher's daughter and cultural bridge. She learned traditional Apache remedies from Kai's relatives and helped distribute them to families in need, gaining a quiet respect even among former doubters. While some, like Hank Dobson, held on to old grudges, their influence faded. The younger townsfolk looked up to Kai and Eliza's marriage as a symbol of change-proof that decency and love could overcome fear and prejudice. On many evenings, Eliza and Kai sat side by side on their porch, watching the sun melt into the red clay hills, hearts full, hands entwined. The flood that once threatened to tear the town apart had instead brought it to a turning point. And so the legend lived on the tale of a half-Apache man who saved the preacher's daughter during a flood, and how a town once torn by suspicion slowly learned to heal, led by two people who refused to be shaped by hatred and chose instead to shape hope. Thank you for venturing back in time with us to the wild, rugged frontier of New Covenant, a place battered by storms, yet redeemed by unexpected acts of courage. Through hardship and flooding skies, Kai Redhawk and Eliza Wilson found a love that proved stronger than prejudice, stronger than small-town gossip, and stronger than the raging river that once threatened to wash them both away. Their story reminds us that doing what's right often demands bravery in the face of fear, and that true acceptance can grow in even the most unlikely ground. If you were moved by this Western saga of love and redemption, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. By showing your support, you help us keep the spirit of the Old West alive in stories that celebrate grit heart and the unbreakable human spirit. Until next time, ride safe and never stop chasing your own frontier.